Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This video PowerPoint will be about President James Monroe, and like the other four presidents prior to him, he also wants to create a strong federal government. Okay, there's just a handful of slides from Chapter 10, Section 1. We're going to cover, and you'll be able to describe the feeling of national unity that followed the War of 1812. You'll be able to explain how Congress tried to strengthen the national economy, and discuss how the Supreme Court, these rulings, supported federal power and economic growth. Some important terms. A contract is an agreement between two or more parties that can be enforced by law. Capitalism, the economic system in which privately owned businesses compete in a free market. That's primarily the economy of the United States, Japan, South Korea. Very little government intervention. Businesses get to make most of the decisions. Interstate commerce, this would be trade between two or more states. And a charter, a legal document giving certain rights to a person or company. Okay, how was the power of the federal government strengthened during the era of good feelings? President Monroe's term in office is known as the, quote, era of good feelings. During this era, the President, Congress, and the Supreme Court all acted to increase federal authority. So there was a big push in the country for federal authority to increase. Also, the era of good feelings is because we had done well with the British in the War of 1812. People kind of were on a high. They were feeling that things were going well. We stood up to the British, and we were showing the world that we can defend and protect our own interests. After 1815, many Americans believed the government should take action to improve the economy. They favored a strong federal government. So again, people were favoring more of this strong federal government. When we look back, by the way, President Monroe, he'll take office in 1817. He also is a Democratic Republican. He's more anti-federalist minded. James Madison is more of an anti-federalist, as was Jefferson. However, though, people began to see that because of the economy, we needed the federal government to do more. Three influential congressmen favored federal action. These three men wanted the government to do one thing or the other. Henry Clay spoke for the West. He argued for better roads and canals to transport goods. With the Louisiana Purchase under Jefferson, people were flocking out west. They needed roads and canals to transport their goods. People were still primarily farmers, and they needed to get their goods to market. John C. Calhoun spoke for the South. He opposed high tariffs because they raised the price of goods. He didn't want high tariffs because the South primarily purchased from Europe, and the goods cost more because of these tariffs. And Daniel Webster spoke for the Northeast. He supported high tariffs as a way of protecting northern industry. He was looking out for what we would think of as the North. The Supreme Court also promoted economic growth and federal power during this era. There were some famous court decisions. McCulloch v. Maryland, this is in 1819. The state of Maryland tried to tax its branch of the federal bank, and the Supreme Court ruled that states had no power to interfere with federal institutions. So this is a pretty big decision that's going to favor strong federal power. Okay. James Monroe, this is going to be section 2 of chapter 10. In this section, you'll be able to explain why Spain ceded Florida to the United States. You'll be able to describe how the Spanish territories in the Americas gained independence, and why and what the Monroe Doctrine was issued and why it was issued. Okay, how did U.S. foreign affairs reflect a new national confidence? When members of Spanish and English colonies began to rebel, European countries ultimately failed to regain their power in the region. So again, other nations beyond the United States began to rebel against Europe and European intrusion. And Europe is slowly losing their power in North, Central, and South America. President James Monroe stated that the United States firmly opposed European influence in the Americas. Now, don't think necessarily United States, think Central and South America as well. We were trying to basically buddy up with Central and South America to keep European affairs out of our side of the world. In the early 1800s, Spain controlled a vast amount of territory in the Americas. If you look at the blue-colored land, you could see that Spain owned a tremendous amount of land. However, Spain's control in Florida was weak, and that's the red circled area. Fugitive slaves could easily cross from southern plantations such as Georgia into Florida and join the Seminole Nation. So again, these southern plantations, they had the fugitive slaves. These fugitive slaves are going to escape to Florida, which is controlled by the Spanish. Together, they would often raid American settlements. So not only the slaves, but the Seminole Indians would raid these settlements in our nation. And this was a problem that had to be dealt with. In 1817, the U.S. sent Andrew Jackson to recapture slaves that had escaped to Florida. Jackson went beyond his orders and seized 2 Spanish towns. Spain could not protect Florida, so it decided to give up the territory. This was called the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819, where Spain ceded Florida to the United States. It was for $5 million. Spain's colonies in Latin America also wanted independence. Now remember, when we talk about Spain, we're talking Europe. Sometimes we forget that Spain is a European nation. Most of the time we've talked mostly about France and especially about Britain. So now that these people are rebelling, these people in Latin America want independence from Spain as well. They're inspired by the revolutions in America and in France. Mexico leads the way in 1810. Father Miguel Hidalgo organized an army that freed several provinces. Another revolution broke out in 1820. Spain could not end the fighting, and Mexico becomes an independent monarchy in 1821, and by 1823 it becomes a federal republic. Remember, a republic is a nation where the citizens elect representatives to rule over them. In South America, Simon Bolivar led several independence movements. In 1819, he defeated the Spanish in Colombia. He became president of the Republic of Great Colombia. Today, this region includes the following nations, such as Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, Panama. And again, this initially was the Republic of Great Colombia. So just pointing out that these Latin America countries are breaking away from Spain and becoming their own nations. Other colonies followed. By 1825, most parts of Latin America had thrown off European rule. So again, the purple now would be new nations, and the green on the map would be European colonies. So you could see that Europe, through Spain, did pretty poorly. So these are all brand new nations. And think about North, Central, South America. It's like a big, impenetrable wall. We're going to tell Europe to stay out of our part of the world. And again, many new Latin American countries. The future of these new countries was soon clouded. France, Russia, and others indicated they might help Spain regain its colonies. The United States wanted to protect trade with Latin America. Again, we had a lot of economic incentives to back up Latin America. As you can see by these arrows, this is coming to a head. Britain agreed with the United States and wanted to issue a joint statement. President James Monroe and Secretary of State John Quincy Adams did not want the U.S. to look like Britain's junior partner, like we were just the tag along or kick around. President Monroe decided to issue a statement. This is a very famous statement called the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine states that the U.S. would not allow European nations to create American colonies or interfere with Latin American nations. So it was a very strong statement to Europe saying, basically, get out of our part of the world. At first, the U.S. relied on Britain's Navy to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. However, as U.S. power grew, the Monroe Doctrine boosted U.S. influence in Latin America. Americans were relieved that their southern borders were secure from European powers. Southern borders meaning Central and South America. Okay, feel free to go back and review. Thanks for listening.